Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Bennick. You know, by the time you see this show, it will be about 3 weeks until Election Day in Bedford. And of course, as you all know, we get to go in and vote, one half on the town end of things and the other half on the school end of things. And this year we will again be voting on the proposed budget put forth by the school administration and school board. And we'll be voting on a couple of smaller warrant items dealing with small pay raises to some of the staff. And the big one will be, we will once again be voting on a pay raise for the teaching staff in Bedford. Now, you know, the budget can really be kind of confusing. I know that when I go online sometimes and see all the different charts and graphs and so on they have there, not being an accountant or particularly liking math, I know I can get confused. And even if you go to the deliberative sessions, and these were the things that were given out to those of you who were there, again, looking at them, it can be a little confusing. So the goal of today's show is to make it easier for everybody who's watching to understand all of these numbers and all these different forms, and to actually hear some of the rationale behind them, which I think is even more important than the actual number itself. And it should be a great fun show, a very informative show, because I'm actually having 3 guests, and the first 2 will be on together, and that will be our Superintendent of Schools, Tim Mays, and he is accompanied by School Board Member Scott Earnshaw, and obviously both of them will give us an awful lot of information. And then after we're done, a special treat will be, we're having Bedford teacher Nate Feldman, and Nate happens to be the president of the Bedford Education Association. And I do want to stress Bedford Education Association. It is a professional association, not a union. And a lot of people, I think, may not realize that. Now, you know, there won't be a lot of decisions on the budget end of the ballot, because I think most people will vote yes, and there's a major reason for that, because if yes doesn't win, the default budget kicks in, and the proposed budget is actually $315,989 cheaper than the default budget. So vote yes on that one. As far as the warrant article to approve the teacher pay raise, that's one that we'll be talking about, I'm sure, at length in both parts of the show. And that we will be talking about a figure that has been very much mitigated by some health insurance savings that were negotiated in an agreement with the members of the Bedford Educational Association. So, having said all that, there's no need for me to say any more. There's a lot to talk about, and we'll just jump right into it. So, Scott, Tim, thank you so much for being here. And
great to be here. Our pleasure.
I know that this is a busy time of year for you, and not the least of which is you're out there trying to drum the drums and get people to understand the budget, and hopefully I know that you're looking to gain support for what the school board is recommending for votes on these warrant issues.
That's true.
Yes. Okay, well, I'll kind of throw a couple of things at you to just start out, and you know, this is going to be an easy show for me because I'm planning on really putting the burden on the 2 of them to give us all the information.
Appreciate that a lot.
I knew you would. Well, I know this year's proposed operating budget is approximately $60,038,000, correct? 380,000. I'm sorry, right?
60,038,000.
38,000.
Yes.
I see right away we had to get him here. And basically, it's essentially pretty close to last year's, about a $330,620 difference if I did my
reduction.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So, how did you manage actually with costs of a lot of things going up, like even just heating bills and so on? How did you manage to actually come in a little bit less?
Well, I'd say the key thing is we've always tried the budget based on our enrollments. We're seeing some decline at the elementary level, and we make staffing decisions based on that. So there is a net reduction of 4.5 professional staff for primarily the elementary schools to compensate for that. And the other big driver, I think, in the reduction was the fact that the board had made a decision last year to establish a contingency fund, that is, not fill certain positions because of the deliberations on the state budget. And this fall decided not to fill those, even though we had the answer to the state budget, and that saved us probably $700,000 in the budget. So those 2 things were the big I think the big savings going from year to year, although there are other factors as well.
Okay, now I do understand, though, that the fact that some positioning was changed with the staff, that it did not increase class size?
Right.
Is that correct?
Well, we have yes, that's correct.
Okay.
The staffing levels are kind of determined by the guidelines the board has established.
Okay.
And so even though I'm reducing them, it's based on the number of kids that we project to have. Hence, I'm within tolerances for the class size guidelines.
Okay, so our numbers are going down slightly.
Slightly,
then, huh?
yeah. We've seen that for a couple of years now.
Okay. What are the major budget drivers?
Well, I'd say insurance always is a big driver.
Okay.
It's a better part of the budget. And we have a couple of capital projects, one being the other half of the roof at Peter Woodbury School that faces County Road, and then the other project that's sizable, about $150,000, is the replacement of the electrical service that goes into McKelvey School. It's over 50 years old. They do not make parts for it. If anything goes, we actually have to have something manufactured. It could be a number of days or weeks or so before we could actually get that part manufactured, flown in, and installed. So I'd say insurance, followed closely by those two projects, and I guess oil would be, just as you know as a homeowner, I know, it's the wild card.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and my understanding, and I'm not a technical person, but my understanding is that with today's technology, sometimes retrofitting old equipment winds up costing more than if you just bite the bullet and get the new stuff.
Yeah, well, I would say that if you could repair things, which we've tried to do for 50 years plus, that's good, and we've tried to do that. But at some point in time, when you can't repair something, the concern we have with McKelvey is if it were to go down and there's a lag time, let's say there's 2 or 3 weeks where we can't get something manufactured and installed, now what do we do about power in the school? And so we're talking about renting generators and setting up a temporary situation. I just don't think that's prudent.
Yeah, no, that could be brutal, especially at certain times of the year more than others.
Right.
Is it correct that the proposed operating budget, and please correct me because again, I'm not a really good number person, that the proposed operating budget, standing alone without the other warrant issues, will represent like a 2-cent tax increase per 1,000?
Right, so I'm glad you asked that question.
Right.
Okay.
When we went to the deliberative session, that was accurate.
Okay.
But we just reviewed our financial report for mid-year. We have found that the surplus this year, the year-end fund balance that we're projecting, has increased given A, warm weather,
Wow.
B, some additional revenues from the state that we hadn't anticipated, and C, the contingency plan we talked about earlier. So that has risen from about $600,000 to about $1.2 million. And right now, the operating budget would represent a reduction in the tax rate of 15 cents.
Really?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
These are the kind of things people like hearing.
Sure.
It is good news.
And I mean, even the 2 cents only represented like $6 on a $300,000 house, correct? So.
Right. So now it's
not
a
even.
reduction.
Right, but if we're looking, as we'll get to in a minute, we're looking at the warrant article for the teachers' raises.
Right.
That's going to be $1 million.
Right.
That represents 30 cents.
30 cents on the tax rate. So you end up with an overall tax increase of 14 cents, which now you're between $40 and $50.
So we're basically been able to cover half of that.
Really?
Either because of the contingency plan or because of our good fortune with the weather.
Because before, on a $300,000 house, you'd be looking at a tax increase in the 90s.
Right.
So now it's going to be half
about,
of that?
40, I think $42 if it's 14 cents.
And that's what the teacher pay raise?
Yep.
That's a huge
with the
difference.
Raise. That's with the raise.
Yeah,
that's
a huge difference.
And without the raise, there's going to be that much of a savings.
It'd be about the similar savings, right?
Wow, that's incredible. And that is good. Congratulations. Now, in the budget, one of the things I did notice that you did have a $36,877 reduction in salary costs for the Bedford Educational Personnel Association, which I made a note to myself represents the secretaries, clerks, paraprofessionals, library assistants, tutors, and food service people. How did you manage to save almost $37,000?
Well, that's the first year of a 3-year agreement, and what what we're going to talk about with all our negotiated agreements that were done this year, which are our teachers and the one you mentioned, which is our support staff and our non-union personnel, is that there's significant risk shift from the district to the employee. In this particular case, the reduction of the savings to the district in health insurance outweighed the salary increases for the support staff.
And it actually was that much?
And it netted out
just those people?
Yeah, and it netted out at a number that would be actually lowering the budget. And the good part of that is the change in health plans, and this is true of the teachers as well as the support staff, and that is the district is now going to use, if these agreements are approved, there's an agreement to use less expensive plans because the employees are assuming more cost for office visits and prescriptions. And although they're going to pay more for their insurance, those two factors give us much better rates, and there's a considerable savings. So
yeah, okay, that in fact, if you looked through my little cards here, you know that was one of the that was one of the things that I wanted to get into, because I think that that's something that maybe was a little confusing to people. They're like, what are they talking about, you know?
So for example,
because at first glance it does sound confusing, but when you hear it out, it really isn't. So
for the teachers, that's a $680,000 savings in insurance costs for the district if they approve the warrant article 2.
Okay. Now, you just did mention that, so that we're looking at 3,400, no, 3,466 after the insurance savings.
That's correct.
Right?
It would have been 1.4 million otherwise.
Right.
That's, I guess it would have been,
well, actually,
more than that.
More than that, because when I added it up, it came to 1,684,363.
Right.
So it's actually more than that.
In the warrant article, and we net out the cost, additional cost of salary, which, as Scott mentioned, was about $1.4 million. The reductions in health insurance savings to the district
brings it
is
down
about
to that.
$680,000. But we also have to budget additional FICA and New Hampshire retirement on all of the additional salary. That makes up the majority.
Of course, yeah. Of course, yeah. And I'm sure most people kind of
because you don't
think
need
of
that additional money.
Right,
it's not
right. Now I know that you had said that for the actual teachers, the average would be 4% net, right?
The aggregate.
The aggregate is 4% net.
So the additional salary after you take out the savings and insurance represents 4% net, and I think the question that's on the tip of the tongue is, so what is the salary increase? It's a 7.8% increase in salary.
Okay. Now, I know, in fact, I sent you an email saying I know you people absolutely love percentages. And I like things easy. So I say, well, okay, so it's whatever percent, but how many dollars is that? So, you know, what does that translate to? And I mean, I realize there's different salary ranges all over the place depending on people's longevity and education and all the rest of it. But, I mean, is there a range that you could say the lowest would be somebody's going to make $500 more a year and the highest somebody's going to make $2,000 a year? I mean, can you put some kind of sense of it so that people understand?
I'd be glad to, but I'm going to tell you a story first.
Okay.
So one of the stories I want to tell you is how we arrived at that.
Okay.
So for the last couple of years, as you know, we haven't had an agreement.
I know.
And so we've had a lot of time to do research with southern New Hampshire towns.
Right.
We've looked at 20 plus districts in the South Central region, as well as peer districts that we compare ourselves for academic performance. So we figured, hey, if we're going to match up against them on how they perform in the classroom, we're going to look at how they compensate their employees. So I wanted to show a slide, I think, that gives some indication of what that looks like.
I knew he'd have some slides. I just know
absolutely.
I can't help myself.
I know, and I'm mean enough to even have said to you on the phone, please don't do a lot of slides because you'll put everybody to sleep.
I won't. but I think it's important to show.
First, I figured your own vivacious spirit won't put them to sleep, you know.
Kathy, I'm sorry. Can't help myself. So I'm going to give you a couple of quick slides where we've compared ourselves with some peer districts. There's 10 that we've used.
Okay, that's up there now.
This one here is for a teacher with a bachelor's degree, 0 years experience, and what's important is we calculated the net pay for each of these school districts by getting their health insurance costs, the cost for their district and how they pay, what the co-pays are,
right.
and we netted it out. So we're comparing net pay for health and dental plans, which are the big variables in compensation for teachers.
Yeah,
so as you can see by the slide here, when we compare our $33,308 to the other peer districts, the blue is that amount of money that our teachers are paid less. And you can see that of the 10, 9 of the 10 are paying their teachers more, and it ranges from, in this particular case, almost $5,000 to maybe $400 for a district. I'll mention Hollis. So I'm going to go to another slide. This is a bachelor's 10 years, again a single medical plan, and now you can see same comparison, net pay. It ranges from almost $9,000. We've got some around $5,000 or $6,000. And we beat, again, one other district, and that's Merrimack to the south of us. And so we took these, we looked at 90 data points. So I've got, I don't have 90 slides, thank God, but I've looked at 90 data points.
I just plain wouldn't want you.
There you go. But I think what the board did was thoughtfully analyze that, and here's what we learned. That our younger, less experienced teachers, and I'm going to say 15 years experience down, so someone might say, well, 15 years isn't, is a lot of experience, but we have people that have taught 30, 35 years, right?
I know you have, yeah.
So what we find is 15 years down, our teachers aren't necessarily competitive, and it varies from $400 or $500 up to, in some cases, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000.
That much,
net pay. On the other hand, when they get to be more experienced, we're very competitive, probably in the top 2, 3, or 4 of the peers that we looked at. And the other variable that was very important was the cost sharing of health insurance. And we found that those teachers in our district that have family plans became much more competitive when we compared to our peers. So
I did hear you say that at the deliberative session.
So there was
one
this
of you said it.
concept of targeting how we were going to use the additional money that we were going to propose for the community to support teachers to those areas that were less competitive with our peers, because for us, being a competitive employer is very important. And the other thing was we wanted to, as Scott will probably allude to, shift risk from the district to the employee to some degree, and to do that in a thoughtful way. I don't know if he wanted to speak more about that.
Yeah, no, my understanding is
we'll come back to that one.
You want to come back to it? Or do you want to keep? No. Oh no, my understanding was that through this, if this all goes through, that the teachers actually will have obviously higher premiums that are going to be taken out of their paychecks for the health insurance, and are also going to be hit with paying higher medical copays and prescription costs than they currently.
So their overall, some of their premiums are being reduced because of the higher copays. And at the same time...
So this was their concession to help the public be able to accept the pay raise.
When we sat down with the teachers, we explained to them that if we're going to have a substantial increase this year, and obviously any increase has to take into account the current economic environment. And both, all of us engaged in the discussions understood that as the backdrop. And so as a board, we said, okay, if we're going to have in this environment a substantial increase, it needs to be linked to 2 criteria. First of all, it needs to be targeted. It can't be blanketly given to everybody because, as Tim just explained, some of our teachers are already competitive and some of them are, there's a substantial gap there. And we need, if we're going to be providing additional funds from the district, we need to have that money going to the teachers who need it most. So we remain competitive. So we have a better chance of retaining those teachers, and also so we have a better chance at hiring at that range, at those ranges in the salary schedule. So that was the first thing, is we want to make sure it is well targeted.
So if I'm reading between the lines here a little bit, I guess the way I'd look at it is that you're protecting the investment you've made in your younger teachers. Okay.
So we aren't becoming a training ground
and then they're moving on with the additional talent to somebody else.
That's right.
Okay.
Bedford School District is recognized as a great place for recruiting great teachers and training them. And if we don't pay them enough, then it's easy for them to hire outright from under us.
And to get to your question about So what does the dollars and cents mean to the teachers? If we can bring up this next slide, what you can see is that for the various plans, single, two-person, and family health plan, the employee is going to take on either $70 more for a single plan, $458 more for a two-person plan.
Is that per month?
Per year.
Oh, per year.
And $1,261 for a family plan.
Okay.
And as we told you before, that in percentages, that's 1%, 3%, and 6% more of the premium, because in the analysis with comparable districts, that would make us more competitive by targeting. The district, on the other hand, on the other half of the slide, is paying $219 less per single plan, $755 less for two-person plans, and $1,662 less for family plans, because more premiums being picked up by the employee, but more importantly,
the higher risk,
the lower cost plans, because the employees,
because of the higher
because the employees
responsibility,
because the employees have picked up,
right.
They've picked up the more cost of insurance for the prescriptions, and more of the cost for the co-pays for visits.
So that obviously lowers the premiums.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So I just wanted, I think that's a good precursor to get back to your original question. So the range of salary increases for teachers would be anywhere from $1,000 to, in some cases, on some points in the salary schedule, about $7,000. And I showed you a slide there on the bachelor's, I think it was 10, where the gap in some places was $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. The one place where we have 5 people is a $7,000 increase, and that's a bachelor's with 8 years experience, and they're going to go from like $38,000 in change up to about $46,000, and that's because it's one of the key areas where we're way out of competition with our peers. In the end, when you add in the additional copay for insurances, those teachers that are our most competitive teachers could end up, if they have a family plan, with about $50 increase in pay net for the year, because they're paying $1,261. They might be $1,000, $1,300 increase. By the time they net out, they've got $50 in their pocket.
Now this probably sounds like a really dumb question. Then why would they support that if all they're going to wind up with is $50 and they have more burden on the health coverage end? I'm missing something.
I think it gets back to one of the comments you made in your opening statement. This organization understands how important it is for us to be a competitive employer for the health and welfare of the district and our kids. So they know that we have a group, a cohort of teachers that are really out of whack when it comes to comparing with other districts, and so they sacrificed this year and took on more insurance so that younger, less experienced teachers could in fact get sizable increases that would now bring us closer to being competitive with our peer districts. And I think that speaks to the professionalism of the organization.
And I think that also gives you the burden of really getting that across to people. You know, because, and it's no secret to either of you, and I'm sure I'll talk about it a little bit with Nate, that, you know, the past couple of years when the issue came up, one of the things that would be said is, well, some of the teachers will leave. And true, some of them, you know, if they had the opportunity to, would and could leave. I mean, no question about it. In the normal scheme of things, you know, that'll happen as well. And unfortunately, and again, I say unfortunately, people heard that part and reacted strongly, and you know that. And you know, some of that was reflected when the votes got counted. So I think that, you know, this time around, you know, it really is comparing apples and oranges. So if it's the orange this time, you need to really show the difference and show that it is the orange, so people can react in a different way, not react in anger, react with understanding.
Well, I think that that's actually a good introduction to the whole way the negotiations were conducted this year. The teachers came to the school board and to the district and sat down and said, listen, what we'd really like to do is is ensure that that we have a partnership. That's a long-term partnership here, and because they recognize that there are competing interests that we have to work together to make it successful. But that's also true within their organization. And there are teachers at different positions in the salary schedule, and as Tim just explained, they have made considerable sacrifice to make it internally fair. And that's it would. So
yeah, and you really need to make people understand that big time.
Well, and I think if you just, I think this is a contract that every voter in the town, when they properly understand it, will support. And the reason I say that is it'll be a huge missed opportunity if we don't, because this contract puts so much money. It's almost a redistribution, essentially, from some of the more experienced teachers to the less experienced teachers. And I recognize that redistribution is not quite the right word there, but certainly they've given up the upside that they otherwise might have had if we'd had just 4% attributed to everybody, or 3% even to everybody. And so instead they have agreed to very focused targeting, which makes us far more competitive in retaining and hiring new teachers. But more important, perhaps even than that, is just the solid numbers. If you look at the way the risk shift works on the insurance, I think that's sort of the second component we ought to touch on here. Okay, so we've talked about insurance percentages that the teachers are taking on, and most significantly in the family policy.
Right.
We've got they had 6% before, so the district was paying 94%. They've agreed to move.
I did see that. Yeah,
they've agreed to move to 88%.
Yeah,
so they've
I saw that.
gone from 6% to 12%. They've doubled the percentage that they're accepting.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay, so let's just think about that portion for a moment.
Yeah, that's a chunk. That's a chunk of money.
If we do pass this agreement, right, and insurance rates continue to increase, which is a reasonable likelihood, given the current environment. If they increase at the same percentage they've been increasing at for the last 3 years, we would anticipate in 5 years, from 2014 to 2018, we would essentially be able to repay the district for the cost of this entire contract, because that's the 6% that the teachers are now taking responsibility for. That would accommodate that percentage of the raise. It'll be a full $1 million worth.
So that people understand, this all rolls together, so that if somebody says no, I'm not giving a pay raise, essentially what they are saying is, I support the insurance as it is now that will continue to increase.
Right.
And that obviously is a wild card.
If they vote down this contract, that means that the town is retaining a higher percentage of the risk.
Right, okay.
And the teachers are willing to make that offer to us because in part, because they recognize it doesn't make sense for the district to have too high of a risk, because if insurance rates go up too quickly, the only alternative we have is to start cutting professional staff. And that's not good for planning for the students or for the professional staff. And so by them accepting a greater percentage of that risk, we ought to be able to mitigate some of those concerns. But it would be a real mistake for our town not to accept this risk shift over the professional teaching staff, in my view.
And how long has it been since they've seen a pay increase?
Well, it's been 2 years.
It is 2 full years.
Yep.
And this would be the third year.
This will be the third year.
Okay.
And when you say pay increase, that's any pay increase.
Yeah, I know.
Teachers don't get an automatic step increase just because they have a year more of experience.
No, I know that.
And many of our voters in town just assume, well, they've got another year there.
That's a good point to make people understand.
I think that is a good point, because people have spoken to me about that, and it is misunderstood, because in other districts, that is the way it works.
Oh, is that right?
Sure. If there's language in their contracts that give them those increases, then they're entitled to them whether the contract passes or not. We do not have that, and hence the teachers are earning the same pay now that they earned 2 years ago.
And, you know, I mean, I'll insert a personal opinion here, and at least a little bit of it, and I do try to be objective as far as I possibly can. And for every one good thing I say, I'll probably say something you won't like. But, I mean, when I hear that a lot of our teachers, not some of our teachers, that a lot of them are earning, you know, 32, 34, 36, 38,000, I have to tell you, I was really surprised because, you know, in today's economy, that does not get you far, obviously, and I think every voter in Bedford can attest to that. And especially a younger teacher who might have a family. I mean, that really creates a very difficult situation. And as I know you know, I don't know if you know, but on occasion, I substitute in Bedford. On occasion. Not that often.
Yeah, I know.
Is that
I did know.
Executive approved?
They like that. And see, that was a surprise to you, huh?
It was.
And in any event, on occasion, I have been known to, I haven't for months, but I have, you know, on occasion done it. And quite enjoyable, I might say. I really liked it. And when I went into it, you know, it was cold, because, I mean, I was never a teacher, and I wasn't trained as a teacher, but, you know, I knew that they needed some subs, so I signed up. And I do have to tell you, and I think I said this to you jokingly on the phone, I was surprised at how intense a job it is. Seriously. I mean, I kind of thought, well, here I am a sub and, you know, no big deal, right? And my first day I learned very quickly that the little buggers would challenge me every chance they got if I didn't act like a real teacher, you know? and I can honestly say to you that and I know I've said this to some of the other teachers, that I came home good and tired. I mean, I really wanted to put my feet up and have a glass of wine, you know, because it's challenging and you can't stop for a second. So, I mean, the teachers are pros. And I do think that, you know, if nothing else, people in town have to regard them as professional people and think in terms of we've got to at least, you know, treat them as professionals.
And the evidence of their professionalism is clear in the results that they get from our students.
Yes.
I mean, I understand. I mean, I think we all understand that there's no one factor that, you know, that determines student results. You know, clearly families play an important role. The students themselves play an important role. But the teachers ought to be, you know, held accountable if they're not performing well. And in our district, the teachers are consistently performing well.
Yeah, I saw an awful lot of dedication. I could say that honestly.
Well, and you can see it in the test results.
Yeah.
We consistently are in the top 1, 2, or 3 in the state in terms of position.
Well, you know what I found interesting is, and I would say just about to every number of the time that I did sub, is that when the kids came in and saw me there instead of their regular teacher, I would say at least half the class would come over to me and ask, was their teacher okay? Was the teacher sick? Had anything happened? I mean, they were genuinely concerned.
I've seen,
you know?
Having been in a lot of schools and a lot of classes, and I talked about this with last year's graduating class, there is such compassion with our kids for each other, but for adults and for those
it was very striking.
That is not
clearly.
That's not unusual.
Yeah, no, I did see that, and I thought that was pretty impressive.
Yes.
Because I'll tell you, I went to nun schools, and when a nun wasn't around, it was yay. We weren't worried that they weren't coming back the next day. We kind of hoped they wouldn't, you know. Now, this will be my nasty question, if you want to call it that. For those folks who are out there who say, okay, you sold us, you know, we're good. We think that we want to support the teachers, but I don't have any extra money, and I don't know how I'm going to come up with it, okay? So, if that were, you know, a big hue and cry around town, and somebody said to you, and you probably know where I'm going to go with this because I was on one of your committees, if somebody said to you, okay, just so long as you guys promise that you will make a lot of effort to cut your operating budget by $1 million, what would you say to that?
Well, what I've said in the past to people like that is two things. We've been charged with putting together an educational program that meets the requirements of law and the state and those sorts of things.
That's not what I'm talking about.
And we've done that. we've done that. So to cut $1 million would cause us to undo some of that and put us in jeopardy. I'd also say that I respect every individual's circumstances.
Yes.
And I don't expect anybody to put themselves in jeopardy financially, and I understand that. So I think they've got to vote their conscience in that regard.
Well, no, I mean, and all right, I will admit that I'm rebel-rousing a little here. For those of you who don't know, or you maybe remember in the papers that there was a committee, and I know you know about it, there was a committee a couple of years ago called the Fees Study Committee, and probably to his regret to this day, Tim, I managed to be on it as one of the citizen representatives, and just general citizen. And even though I was not the only general citizen, I believe that I was the only person at the table who either wasn't with the school department or did not have kids in the school system somewhere. So the first night we all introduced ourselves. Just to make it clear, I introduced myself as the cranky older one who didn't want to spend any money. And I took my role very seriously and argued with them a lot about a lot of things. And I was always coming up with ideas on things that I thought that maybe weren't 100% essential to education. I know, yes, to well-being and to growth and to social development, to all those neat things, but not necessarily 100% necessary for a good education. And I guess, you know, we won't even use this show to talk. Maybe we'll have them come on another time, but that's where I was leading. Some of those things, because you know, I know you both know this, there are people in Bedford who say, that high school's a country club, or whatever, and who will point to different things that they'll say, we're spending this on that, whether it's sports or activities or a whole bunch of different things, you know, depending on who you talk to. And I guess that's what I'm saying to you, recognizing that there really are people in pain right now financially in Bedford, a lot of people out of jobs, worried about jobs, and all you have to do is look at the foreclosures going on, and it's scary. So that's why I'm throwing that out at you. Are you willing to continue that effort? And I know you've done stuff, and I don't want to be unfair, because you changed school bus routes to save money, the high school parking fees to bring in money, the extended kindergarten to bring money in. I know you've done a whole bunch of innovative things, and that's my question. Do you intend to continue doing those kind of things for us?
Well, there's two things I want to say. So you mentioned you started to compare our schools with other districts, so let me just add to that.
Okay.
So just take high school, for example.
Yes.
So last year, our per pupil cost for high school was a little over $11,000. So if you go to Souhegan, it's $17,000.
I know.
Wyndham, with 3 grades, is $16,000. If you compare us with 10 other districts, we're lower.
I know that.
The statement that some might make that we're spending a lot for our kids to do X, Y, Z, not compared to our peers.
I know that.
All right. So the other thing is we have made a concerted effort to, because the board has asked us to, in our committee that we had that year, we tried to reach out to figure out ways that within our own business of education that we could bring in additional revenue. So the extended kindergarten was one where we did that this year. We're trying to expand that this year to our 3 schools. Hopefully that would generate more revenue.
I know you're talking about online learning as a potential.
We also are the fiscal agent for a program in collaboration with CMC, which enables some of our high school special education students to get job training skills. We bring in about $60,000 or $70,000 in revenue via tuition. We're responsible for the teacher over there, but the revenue pays for that, and we make $60,000 or $70,000 in revenue. So those are the kind of things we've been trying to do to bolster the revenue line, which I will say it's harder to get in local revenue, but we're doing that. And the other one I would mention is community ed. When we first started the high school, we had talked about trying to do something with community ed, and initially we actually cut the position that was in the budget to reduce the budget. We are piloting some community ed classes this year, and we're trying to see what options we have to expand that program. We're working collaboratively with the town so that we don't have redundancy in terms of programming, but we're seeing promising initial results so that maybe over time that becomes a profit center. I won't exaggerate the potential, but if you can bring in $10,000, it's $10,000.
Right.
So we're trying to do those kinds of things while on the expense side be very, very careful about how we spend our money.
So see, aren't you glad that I asked you that question so you could say all that?
Well, and let's just go back to the other issues we already talked about.
Yes.
Okay. In this year, the one that we're talking about $1 million increase for that warrant article. Half of that has already been covered by virtue of the contingency plans, the other measures implemented by the board, and the good luck of the weather. Okay, so we have done a substantial amount in covering this year's proposed increase. In addition to that, and we will continue to do those kind of things across the board. In addition to that, if we did nothing else, this contract will pay for itself in 5 to 6 years.
With the insurance savings.
Because of the insurance risk shift. So even if we were to have somebody in town who didn't think that education was a value, right? Who only concern was their pocketbook, and I don't believe that that's what we have in our town. I think we have people who are very committed to education. I think we have people who are really balanced about it. I don't think there are folks that are digging in their heels. But even if there were somebody just looking at the money, that's a pretty good payback period. If any of the entrepreneurs out there looking at making an investment, saying, okay, how long is it going to take before I turn a profit? If I'm going to invest $1 million in something, it's going to pay back in 5 years, and after that, it's going to be profitable all the way along the way. I think that's a good story. We ought to make sure that that gets out there and people support this contract.
And you've both stated your case well, which is what I was hoping would happen.
Thank you.
Because again, I started out saying, you look at those budgets and it can be very, very confusing. And when you just look at numbers, sometimes it can be mind-boggling. And I did say that I wanted you to be able to explain the numbers and kind of, show the legs behind them. And I think that you both did achieve that. And I know that when I asked you that question, you probably were thinking, oh, but
no,
I got what I wanted.
There you go.
I got you to explain some of the things that you have done with the taxpayer in mind, and I also got you to say that you'll keep doing that. Sure. And that's what we like hearing too.
And we will. We will.
I know you will.
Thank you, Kathy.
And if you don't, we'll drive you crazy.
We'll be back here to talk. We'll be back here to explain it.
Hey, there you go. There you go. Right. We could make this a regular thing. It'd be fun.
We'd be happy to be held accountable.
All right. Well, if we're going to have any time at all for Nate to talk for the teachers, we'll have to end this, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
But I do appreciate you being here.
It's good of you to have us on.
It's all my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I hope you feel as though it was a good use of your time, too.
We do. Thank you very much.
Great. And then if you just give us a second to change around here a little bit, the next guest will be coming right on. Okay, we're back as promised, and this will be the fun part of the show because my guest now is Nate Feldman, who happens to be president of the Bedford Teachers Association rather than a union, and I do want to get clearly across that it's not a union. And Nate should be a lot of fun to talk to because that's what he's so good at every day. He's a grade 8 teacher at the Lurgio School in Language Arts. So I'm planning on letting him doing 95% of the talk here in this segment of the show. Nate, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for making the time. I know you're up bright and early every morning, and here we are getting on till late at night taping this.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you having us on, and I appreciate you highlighting this issue of the teacher's contract this year.
My pleasure.
So I think it's very important for us to come on and talk about that, talk about the importance of it, and also touch on some of the things. I was in the booth, as you know, as you had Mr. Mays and Mr. Earnshaw on. I think it's important for us as the association to reiterate some of the things that the community is hearing from the administration and from the school board members, because the teachers are 100% on board and excited about this new agreement that we're putting before the voters in March, and we're very excited about some of the changes we were able to make with the board, both on the salary side but also on the insurance side, because we understand the importance of a sustainable, excellent education here in Bedford. So I really appreciate you allowing me to come on.
Well, I'm delighted that you're here, and we kind of left it up to Tim and Scott to carry the numbers end of the thing, and they have to come out and people have to understand them. But I think you know that when I had first approached Tim to do the show, I felt very strongly that it was one thing to be able to give the information, but it was kind of another thing to be able to give the face to
Absolutely.
it. And the teachers are the face of this issue. And yes, I mean, the parents of the kids see you people all the time and,
right.
and all that, but the rest of the community, I mean, those of us who don't have kids in the school system or whatever, we really don't get the chance to talk with you all and to hear what you have to say and to hear your point of view on this. And as you know, this was an issue that a couple of times got a little contentious. And I think a lot of that rancor was due to misunderstanding. So this is why I really wanted to be able to see somebody like you, a teacher, himself or herself, be able to come in and talk about this.
I think one of the things you touched on both at the top of both segments and just there is the fact that we are a teachers association. We're not trying to behave like a union. We don't want to behave like a union. I think you're right, there are some misunderstandings that have happened in the past. We've really taken a deliberate direction this year to work with the school board in negotiations, and then both after negotiations and talking to the town about this, about how this new contract really represents a step forward for Bedford in supporting its professional staff, but then also in the professional staff supporting the schools and the community in a way that, again, we can create a sustainable education system. We looked at issues when we sat down at the negotiating table with the board, and we sat there and looked at local issues, and we attacked them from a local perspective. So one of the things, as a professional association, one of the decisions that we made is we were going to go in there and only the Bedford teachers were going to sit and negotiate with the board. We didn't have any representation from any outside groups or any of our national or state affiliations, and we looked at the issues that Bedford was facing locally, and we wanted to deal with them locally, and we wanted to address them. So as Tim and Scott talked about, one of the things we looked at was competitive compensation and where we're competitive and where we're not. And the teachers took, I would say, a very honest look at how we need to make sure that we're competitive everywhere. And there were places where I think they pointed out we were competitive, and then there were places where we weren't. And so any funds that we were looking at, we agreed with the board needed to be targeted to where we weren't competitive. I think, once again, as an association, one of the things we recognize is all teachers in the district, K-12, actually pre-K-12, we know that we're the best teachers when we're teaching right next door to the best teachers. And we want to make Bedford a district that can attract and retain the best teachers. So when we looked at salaries, we looked at targeting those to where we needed to target in order to attract and retain. And then on the flip side, when we looked at insurances, we looked at that as a structure where, insurance is a pie, right? The premium. And so right now the district is eating 94% of that pie. That's not a sustainable way to move forward when we consider how insurances are always increasing. We looked at our peer districts the same way we looked at compensation. We looked at, well, what are they doing with insurances? And we tried to get ourselves more in line by differentiating who's paying bigger shares. So the family plans, there's a more expensive plan, they should be paying in more. Single plan, less expensive plan, they should continue to take on additional shares, but not as much as the family plan. So that's another way we were able to target those areas where we weren't competitive. And that's really an issue that we faced as a quality education issue. If we can't resolve these fiscal issues for our budget, then we're not going to be able to retain and maintain those program levels that we've had that make our schools great, and something we're very concerned with. So,
well, I think one of the things that I personally find impressive and that I think will resonate to a lot of people in Bedford is that what you have all gone through, the teachers with the school administration and so on, this is not like a test labor union case to see if it will fly. This is something I've not heard of it being approached this way. So this is something that really is local to Bedford, with Bedford issues, Bedford problems, Bedford population, Bedford everything in mind, not something that, the big national union or something is coming in saying, we will do it this way.
Absolutely not. I think a lot of those issues that come up in public education nationally are issues that we really, on the local level, want to steer clear of. And they're not ways that we want to go about doing business. We're concerned with education in Bedford. We're the Bedford Education Association. obviously we have state and national affiliations.
Of course.
That's, you know,
well, there'd be professional reasons for that,
cost of doing business in a lot of ways. But when it came to negotiations, we want to look at the situation in Bedford, look at what we're doing in Bedford, and look at how we can maintain what we're doing in Bedford by again addressing those issues of the interplay between salaries and insurances. So we looked at that, and the association almost unanimously supported this contract. Even the teachers who at the top end of the pay scale, the more senior teachers, if they're taking a family plan, I think Mr. Mays pointed out, there are teachers that are taking basically a $50 increase after everyone's been frozen for 2 years. Right. I would imagine that wasn't, you know, if you're a teacher in that position, that didn't feel great initially. But again, when we looked at it and we looked at where are we competitive, where are we not competitive, we had very honest discussions and with each other and amongst the teachers, and we came to a decision collectively that this was the best way forward, the right way forward. And I think that this is an agreement that puts us on the right path towards future agreements as well. So while this is a one-year agreement and we're taking the insurance risks, and there's certainly salary increases that are obviously going to be voted upon, it sets the tenor. It created a relationship around that negotiations table that I think is very positive and one we want to build on it. I think Scott touched on that pretty eloquently when you had him on before, where we really built relationships around the table that we can have honest discussions with how to maintain the excellent level of education in Bedford.
How hard was it, I imagine in the beginning, when you first started presenting some of these ideas that are a little different, there may have been a little bit of resistance or disbelief. How hard was it to actually reach that point where, you know, all the teachers were kind of on board to saying, you know, we really do need to try something a little different? I had the great fortune to actually go around to all the schools with the vice president of the association, Nick Bellows, the day after we had come to our tentative agreement with the board, the day that negotiations came to a positive conclusion, and to really go, or the day after we had presented it to our association, and we were able to go into all the schools and talk to teachers one-on-one, teachers all over the spectrum, senior teachers, teachers early on. We were able to talk to teachers individually and say, here's where you're at now, this is your insurance, here's where you will be, this is your insurance, this is the net out. And across the board, having those conversations both in small groups and one-on-one, we had just overwhelmingly positive reactions from teachers. And again, even if they were in that situation where they were only getting a $50 or a very modest increase. And I think that speaks volumes to the fact that they understood that, you know, whereas they might be at a place in their career where they are competitive and they're not seeing an increase, even again after 2 years of not seeing an increase, they know that they're teaching right next door to some younger teachers, some teachers just starting out in the profession who haven't seen an increase, who are making in that $30,000, mid-30s range, which is, that's not an easy place to be. And I think we had very professional, honest discussions with each other about this being the way that we had to move forward. And I just think, more than anything, the biggest message that we want coming out of our association right now is just how pleased, top to bottom, we are with the way we were able to come to this agreement, and also with the outcome of the agreement, and with the provisions that we think are going to create sustainable, excellent education in Bedford. It's a lot of good unity.
It was very encouraging, and I felt that as I got to tell the story over and over again, because I sat at the negotiation table for several months and was able to see the process of looking at the research. Tim did just an amazing job of getting our peer districts together, finding out their insurance structures, finding out their salary structures, and really having an honest discussion at the table of where do we need help, where do we need to bring people up. Having all that information, I feel like when you have good information like that and you share it with people, they're very understanding, and that's how I hope that this voting process is going to go, and that's why I really appreciate you allowing me to come on the show and talk about it, because I think as people get informed about this, they're going to be supportive for financial reasons, but also just because of the great relationship that it's producing in our schools, and between the board and our administrators and the association. I think we're all working together and really putting education first, which is important.
And I think, you know, I do think the people in Bedford do want to be fair. I know that, you know, the last couple of election processes, it got a little rancorous on every end, and people got angry and people's feelings were hurt and all the rest of it. But I think everybody's he's moved on past that and has reached a point where they can look at something and make, you know, a thought or make an opinion on that.
Yep.
And my sense in the community is that there's not that anger that this time, that people are supporting the teachers. My sense is that there are going to be some folks who, because of financial reasons, are really going to have to grapple with this.
Absolutely.
But I do think that the more that you state your case, and the more that you and Tim and school board members and so on are able to really get out and talk to people about it, the stronger your case gets, because it's convincing. And I think, and I mentioned to you when I talked with you, we met for a couple of minutes the other day because we had never met each other before, and I think I did, one of the things I did say is that you know, our teachers are our professionals here in Bedford, and I personally don't want to think that a professional person who has invested a lot of time in getting an education and investing a lot of money in getting an education, and the young teachers are probably loaded with student loans and so on, paying for that education. And I don't want to think in terms of, you know, our professionals having to scrape by, you know. And I know that they recognize times are tough because a lot of teachers are living the same tough times too, and it's kind of a shared, you know, it's a shared thing. And I think I even used the analogy to you that if I were going to the doctor today, I wouldn't want to think that last night he was working a second job. And I don't want to think the same thing about our teachers, that in order to stay teaching and stay dedicated to the kids, that they have to go out and get a second job and such too to pull it off.
I think one of the key things about this agreement is that it is going to alleviate some of that stress at the lower ends of the pay scale. So those teachers just coming in the first 5 years, first 10 years of their career, when they're struggling to get up that ladder and where they've been frozen. You know, a teacher in the fall of 2009 has the same salary as in the spring of 2012 now. So I think that is.
And again, I know that you recognize there are folks, you know, that have had some financial challenges, and I guess, you know, to them we'd say, try to do the best you can on this issue.
I think absolutely. I don't think anyone's asking someone to put their own personal finances into real jeopardy. But I do think that over the long term, this contract makes sense financially. It's
been a very creative approach,
a majority
to really keep some costs down and do some good things.
I think it's very positive, going in a really great direction. So yeah.
All right. Well, I wish we had more time, Nate.
No, I thank you for
I'm delighted that you're here. And again, you know, you don't have to listen to me today. Yay for everybody, huh?